time.
On today's episode of Big Time, the podcast brought to you by our friends at the Landscape Supply Center out there in Herman, Maine. Great news. They just re-upped. We got sponsorship for another year. It's fantastic news. Sponsorship is very important. It's very important with today's guest. Ladies and gentlemen, we are diving into the world of stock car racing, the business side of it. Our first professional athlete on Big Time. It's a big time deal. Fort Kent's very own Austin Theriault on Big Time. Let's go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the podcast we call Big Time, the podcast. We're going into a new direction once again this week. Last week we dove into the world of music. This time we're diving into the world of stock car racing. That's be the correct category, right? Right, Austin? Stock car?
It would be. And once again, as we talked about before, I'm excited to be with you tonight. Probably first time race car driver on the podcast, right? And
first time.
It's sort of connected from Maine and from small town Fort Kent, Maine. So it's good to be with you.
All right. So Austin Theriault, Fort Kent native, race car driver. This is big. The first question I have for you is because obviously you spend a lot of time in the South. The South is kind of like the hotbed of racing and stuff like that. How often or how bad do those Southerners butcher your last name when they try to say Theriault for the first time?
Pretty much every single time. but it's funny because I think I've gotten so used to it that I have to correct myself when I'm introducing myself to somebody, not saying, "Hey, this is Austin Theriault" or Austin Theriault, because it's almost easier to pronounce to introduce yourself that way because then you don't have to correct anybody.
You must have the only French name on the circuit, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I would say right now that's pretty fair to say. But every once in a while, somebody will ask me, "Hey, are you related to such and such person?" There was a female race car driver before my time. Her name was Michelle Theriault, and so I get that question a lot because she raced for several years in the different circuits and whatnot. I think she's quite a bit older now and sort of retired from racing, but she had the Theriault name in stock car racing before I moved to town.
Right. So I'm going to be curious as to how the whole stock car racing thing started, because it's obviously not the first thing you think of when you think Northern Maine. So we'll take it way back. We'll start from the beginning. We're going to get to know this story here and find out how this all came about. So, as I mentioned earlier, Fort Kent native, born and raised. Not really much of a racing scene up there. I mean, the only racing stuff that I can think of growing up as a kid was Spud Speedway, and then if you were a Boy Scout, I forget what it was called, but we used to race the little like wood cars, whatever that's called.
Pinewood Derby cars.
Pinewood Derby cars. So that's the only two things I can think of racing up there. So what are your earliest recollections of racing? What kind of attracted you to it? And how did it all get started?
Well, I did Pinewood Derby cars.
Yeah.
I was in not the Boy Scouts, but the Cub Scouts for like half a year. And that I moved on quickly from there. And my first race on any sort of racetrack was, like you said, it was at Spud Speedway somewhere around 2007. So way back to I think maybe even before high school. Figure 13 years old. I bought an old piece of junk car. My grandfather, I think, bought it for like $500 or something like that. And it had some safety, equipment in it. It had a roll cage, which I don't even know if was mandatory back then. But looking back at it now, it's amazing to think that, hey, we raced these cars and came through the other side and didn't get hurt. But a long ways from 2007 to 2019. But I raced at Spud Speedway for about 2 to 3 years, and in that time period, won a championship. Was still racing like in a class with, I think, from 13. It was like a younger age class, and there were some kids my age, maybe a little bit older. So that was the championship that I won. And it wasn't until maybe 16 or 17 that I started racing outside of Spud Speedway, like in southern Maine. I think you're maybe familiar, like there's a track in Scarborough,
Yep.
Beach Ridge Motor Speedway. I didn't do the track closest to you would be like Speedway 95 in Herman or Bangor. I didn't do that one until I was 17 or 18 as well. But I was also like racing somewhat in New Hampshire, some in like Vermont, Connecticut, actually Connecticut, Canada. So as a family, we'd travel like 9 to 10 hours a weekend. And probably be more if you count like there and back, because I have to leave for school, head to the races maybe Friday, race Saturday or Sunday, and then immediately head back for school on Monday. So that was a lot of my high school career, and I wrestled like freshman, sophomore, junior year. And so as you can imagine, that was okay because of the winter time. There's not a lot of racing going on, but by the time I was a senior in high school, like the racing was picking up to where I even had to like not do wrestling, just because like the winter time was all about preparation for the next year, and getting everything ready, getting your schedules planned, getting the cars prepped and prepared for racing. And that took me up until graduation of high school. And that's when I basically left Fort Kent, spent a lot of time in southern Maine, but also spent a majority of my time in North Carolina, working for different teams down here, different like racing organizations, trying to get opportunities to move up to the next level. And it was quickly after I graduated high school that those sort of doors started to open for me, and carried me pretty much year to year. Because for a young person in racing, somebody that doesn't have like a big Fortune 500 company sponsoring them, a lot of it's just year to year, depending on what opportunity, depending on what team that you're has an opening to race for. So that's pretty much what I've been doing up until now, from call it 2014, racing for a team owned by Dale Jr. in one of the NASCAR series, a team owned by Brad Keselowski in 2015, and I won't go too much further because I think our conversation will kind of jump in and out of like some details as far as the NASCAR stuff. But I basically jumped in and out of different types of cars and different series from 2014 up until 2019, which brings us to the conversation here now.
Gonna get to our first segment. Still looking for sponsorship. Just like Austin has mentioned, sponsorship is the name of the game when it comes to racing. Also in the podcast industry, we need a sponsor for Ethan. Ethan asks big time questions. Ethan, what's your first question?
On today's Ethan Asks Big Time Questions, Austin Theriault, we finally get a pro athlete on the pod. It's been a long time coming, and this shit is big time. So my first question for you, Austin, I don't know if you knew this, but I was part of the crew that built all the stone patios and walls at your parents' house. And I remember seeing you ripping around the property. You're probably 9 or 10 years old on your dirt bike every day, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And I remember thinking to myself, that kid's going to be in the fucking X Games one day or something. So what got you interested in motorsports, and eventually what led you on the path to want to pursue race car driving as a hobby and eventually as a career?
Great question, Ethan.
Yeah, absolutely. See, I'm going to go a different direction because I never really talked about it. Remember when I mentioned that my grandfather was pretty important in my early career because he bought me that Pontiac Grand Am, which was my first race car. He was such an important, basically between an inspiration and making it happen and actually doing it. He opened some big doors for me. And I'm never gonna forget that part. Luckily, he's still with us to this day, and he still really enjoys racing, and he watches pretty much every single one of my races, at least on TV, if not in person. He's going to be down there at Daytona. Actually, he's camping out for the winter, but it's exciting.
You mentioned your first car back in the day at Spud Speedway. It was like a $500 car. Do you remember what kind of car it was?
Yeah, it was an '86. It was an '86 Pontiac Grand Am. I don't actually have that car anymore. I have two cars that I raced at Spud Speedway in storage right now. I guess it's just like maybe in the future it'll be like a trip down memory lane. But
Right.
the car after that was a Dodge Neon, and then I purposely built a Ford Mustang for racing. And it's funny because it should be like this, but my first car, the Pontiac Grand Am, was kind of a piece of junk. And, we did what we could. I learned. It was my first time on the racetrack. I learned what I could, and I raced that for a while. But every single car after that, was better and faster and looked better and it performed better. So that was exciting, learning about the cars as I was progressing in my career.
So you mentioned the first time your first race was at Spud Speedway, and you were still in high school, so didn't even have your license at that point. Prior to stepping onto that track for the first time, like, how fast have you ever driven prior to your first race? Like, that had to be the first time going that fast ever in your life. Do you remember like your initial reaction to getting behind the wheel? Like, how does it even feel? Like, you got to start somewhere, obviously, as a race car driver, but getting behind the wheel and stepping on a racetrack for the first time, I'm guessing all kinds of feelings.
Yeah, it was a big rush, and it's hard to imagine now, the speeds that I've been, and then looking back, Spud Speedway is a small track compared to a lot of the other tracks on the circuit, on the NASCAR circuit. Spud Speedway is not a NASCAR track, but it's like a third of a mile long, in a circle, a third of a mile long. So you could probably reach 60, 80, 90 miles an hour in like a Pontiac Grand Am or a Ford Mustang, a four-cylinder type car. But that was still a rush. When you start, you don't know anything different. And if you're involved in any sport, the minute you progress to the next level, you kind of get adjusted to it and acclimated to it. So when you actually jump back into something that's slower or like a lower level of rate of competition, it almost comes easier. So that's the way I look at it now. It was a huge rush, a huge adjustment, but look at what goes on now, and it would be like nothing to jump back into it and probably do really well if I could jump back into the same cars that I started in.
What was your mom's initial reaction? I'm guessing every mom, they feel a certain way about their baby boy. Were your parents always supportive, or was one more supportive than the other, or how was that? How was that relationship?
I feel like they were both pretty supportive. I have this kind of conversation with a lot of people, and it's funny because the mother's usually the one that's really not holding you back, but really kind of, hey, is this right, or is this okay? Is this going to be safe? I don't want anything bad to happen, which is good, but I never really felt like that from my mother per se, because she was always pretty supportive. She would come to a lot of the local races, especially when we started, even when we were doing regional racing, like in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, Canada. She would come and cook and bring food for the team. So I think that was a way for the whole family to be involved.
When did you kind of figure out that you were good and this is something you wanted to chase? I mean, did you have great results right away, or did you struggle at first?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody really has great results to start. Like, if you want to really get down to it, the first half year at Spud Speedway, it wasn't based off of results. We were just having a really good time. It wasn't until I really started to take it a little bit more seriously. 17, 18 years old, basically high school graduation staring me in the face, and I have to make a decision. Hey, am I gonna relocate Well, even outside of Maine, am I gonna potentially make the move to North Carolina, right outside of Charlotte, where all the big major teams are, and start networking, start talking to them, start driving for them, and that sort of was the ledge. So when I finally jumped over that ledge, 2013 or 14, that's when it really became serious for me.
What kind of high school, or how was your time in high school? Because obviously you said that you spent a lot of time, obviously doing this in the warmer months, wrestling and stuff in the winter months. Um, was high school kind of like just like I'm here to get it over with, and then I want to do the race car thing, or did you enjoy your time in high school?
I enjoyed my time in high school. I felt like I took education sort of seriously, like maybe more than most, but not to the extent that some other people have, which is totally fine. I everybody has a different high school experience, right?
Right.
I'm sure you kind of say the same thing. And between sports and racing, I still did my homework. It was funny because senior year was probably, they say senior year is the easiest, but maybe senior year was the hardest for me just because I was having to juggle a lot of different things, even without doing wrestling and whatever. Just because there was a lot of, I mean, these are life decisions you have to make. Everybody else is applying to college. I was applying to college too. I applied to some colleges in Maine and outside of Maine, thinking that, hey, this could be a backup plan if I don't get the right calls for me to go down to North Carolina and start working with some of the teams, then I'm going to have to possibly go to college or go to work. So I just kind of took it all the way to the end, right till graduation, and even after graduation, when people had said, "Hey, I'm going to this college," I didn't know that. I didn't know. So I finally woke up one day and said, "You know what? It's time to pack the car up and head south, and try to make a go of it." So I've I haven't pursued college yet, but that's always still available. And the thing I tell people, and it's hard to understand even from the outside, is in a way, college is going to be there. You see people 25, 30, 40, in their 50s going to college. But racing's kind of a young sport. And if you're not 20 in pursuing it, it's going to be really hard to be 30 in pursuing it, just because if you haven't broken into it, by the time you're 20 or 25, it's almost impossible. So that's the route I took.
Yes, let's talk about the kind of like the path to get to the basically the major leagues of racing. So in most sports here in America, to get to the highest level, it's high school to college, college to pros. A little bit different when it comes to racing, because obviously you don't race in college. You don't get a scholarship to go race and then try to get to the pros after that. So let's start from the very bottom. So you started at Spud Speedway. What was the next step up from there?
The next step up from there was like I said, the regional type racing.
And that's more like, is that like a New England circuit, pretty much?
Yeah, it's like a New England and Canada circuit,
Yep.
and the cars are way more professional. The cars go faster. They're purposefully built for racing. They have all the safety components. They have all the components in there for speed and just maximizing how fast you can go around the track. I did that like I said, I did that up until I graduated high school, and even then, I still was involved in regional racing. Like I would come up basically, I think 5 or 8 weekends out of the year and still compete up in New England. But I was at that time spending a majority of my time in North Carolina in the South racing down there.
So you got like the New England circuit and stuff like that, and then from New England, is it like the big like the national scene from there, pretty much?
So yeah, thanks for asking it again, because I kind of was potentially going off track. But the easiest way I can explain it is, like in college athletics, you'll have somebody basically gets, hey, we're going to pay for you to go to college, right?
Yep.
And you're going to come play for us. Well, in racing, it's kind of like that, except the you do that from sponsorships, whether it's the team sponsoring you, coming down and saying, hey, we're going to put you on like a development program, or which we may get into later, from the business standpoint, there may be like a sponsor that wants to puts you under their wing and says, "Hey, we're gonna pay for you to develop. We're gonna pay for you to race, so that you can kind of develop your skills and get to the next level." So that's the scholarship. Like that's the closest comparison I can make between college scholarships and somebody that's young. There's a lot of meetings that takes place with teams. There's a lot of meetings that takes place with teams potentially and with sponsors and companies, so that you can get better. You can race, and they will pay for you to do that.
What was like your first kind of like, oh wow moment in terms of this is a business? Like how young were you when you realized, okay, like I enjoy racing, but this is also a business, and sometimes feelings can get hurt, stuff like that. Like how early were you exposed to that, or how early did you realize, like, wow, like this is a whole nother level in terms of when it becomes like a professional thing?
Well, I mean, I feel like even in high school, even the latter parts of high school, as I was wrapping my sort of my mind around how this was all going to work, being involved in these sort of discussions about business and sponsorship, which is, like I said, kind of equally to the scholarship part of college and in helping you develop your talent. So 17, 18, 19 years old, involved in some of these business discussions about racing and sponsorship kind of makes you grow up pretty quick, and you figure out how to handle it. You figure out how to present yourself, like how to talk in a situation where maybe you're communicating with like a president of a company, even if it's a small local company or a small regional company. That's not something they teach you in high school. So so I had to grow up pretty quick from that standpoint. But I will tell you, jumping from then up until now, just what I haven't learned in college, I feel like I've learned a lot of skills, like negotiation skills, business skills, like how to get the right deal, how to make stuff happen, how to plan, how to communicate and get a group together, how to set up your team so that everybody's on the same page. Like those are all really important skills, and I was doing that basically at age 18, right after high school.
Right. So we mentioned, obviously, when you think of race car driving, Maine isn't really a hotbed in terms of, we've had Ricky Craven, and that's the only one I know. That maybe there's others that have made it from Maine, but not a long list of guys that have made it from this area. Did you have anyone that kind of took you under their wing early on? Just try to teach you things, show you things, maybe show you things on the business side that kind of helped you progress along the way?
Yeah, there's a few people. I'm glad you mentioned that, because around the time that I was still racing that tour regionally in New England, I had started to kind of meet a few people that were connected to the southern, the southern part of the United States, which is where a lot of the teams are located. Actually, the guy was a general manager at one of the NASCAR teams, and so he was one of the first people to open the door to me and say, "Hey, look, after you graduate high school," his name was Wayne. After you graduate high school, think about coming down here. And the person that got me connected with him was a gentleman from Southern Maine who also races. His name's Scott. And the whole conversation and why I'm really excited about this conversation in particular is because people don't realize it. If you're in like college, or even if you're in business, you know this if you're in business, but everything seems to be based off relationships. And it's not like, hey, you're going to get in front of somebody else because you have the relationship. Sometimes that does happen, but it's interesting because it's like one person that you meet can really help either point you in the right direction or give you some ideas, give you some thoughts on how to get to the next level wherever you're trying to go. And it was the same thing for me. That one person, Scott, opened up a door for me to talk to that guy, Wayne, which was the manager down at a NASCAR team in North Carolina. And, from there, it really just kind of blew up for me.
So you mentioned when you first got down to North Carolina, and real quick, just explain to those who may not be that too familiar with racing and stock car racing, just Why is Charlotte's considered like the home of NASCAR, right? It's kind of like the hotbed. Can you briefly explain like kind of like the history behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the NFL, for example, they have different teams across the country, and just based off of the franchises and whatnot, the NFL is like the parent organization, but the teams are all basically independently owned. Most of them are independently owned, and so from a NASCAR standpoint, what you have in North Carolina is, instead of the teams being located in, like, hey, I've got a NASCAR team in California, in Florida. Basically, what happened was all the team owners from day one, when NASCAR was started, they all kind of found their way into the same location, which I think the reason that it all happened was just to have the resources all together, because maybe what's different from other sports is, in order to build a successful team, like, you have to be next to companies that can supply you with engines, can supply you with bodies, chassis, um, everything that makes a car, run and go fast. And so from a team standpoint, you have all of the big teams down here. And the second reason why too is people, people, people. I say this every day, but they say, well, what makes a team successful? You know this as well as I do. It's the people behind you.
Right.
So from a skill standpoint, a lot of the people that are highly skilled in NASCAR, from a mechanic standpoint, from a engineer standpoint, from a business marketing standpoint, the drivers too, like, everybody's here. And I think it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's why nobody else really, there may be one or two other teams that are outside of the region, but if you want to be successful, you got to be here, just because of the people, the resources are in a 50-mile radius.
Oh, right, ladies and gentlemen, going to get to our segment, our sponsored segment. Charlito Wonder is brought to you by the good folks at Rock's Family Diner. Real quick, Austin, what's your go-to meal when you're back home? You got to stop at Rock's when you're in town. What's your go-to meal?
When I'm back home in Fort Kent, you're talking, right?
Yeah, at Rock's Family Diner. What's the go-to meal at Rock's?
Rock's Family Diner. I'll tell you, my go-to meal before I started to actually watch what I eat, but still, even when I go home, I really don't care, is a double cheeseburger, a plain double cheeseburger with no ketchup, and a mixed fry.
You got to get the mix.
Is my go-to.
Got to get it. All right, Charlito, what's your question this episode?
Yo, Austin, what up, man? It's Charles out here in Halifax. I ran into you that one time at the airport here in Halifax. You're probably the biggest celebrity to come through that place. I just wonder, man, what's your everyday ride? Are you like a Porsche guy, a big pickup guy? What kind of toys you got? You got ATVs, snowmobiles? Let's hear about the little garage collection you got going. Congratulations on all the work, man. Put in the time and doing big things. It's awesome. Representing Fort Kent. Take it easy and keep on succeeding, man.
All right, yeah. So
I love it.
What are you driving on a daily basis? Let's start with that.
I love that question, because I think I let people down when I tell them, but I'm all about focusing on, like, the things that matter, per se, and it's not that I don't care about having a new car, but I'd rather, like, I'd rather spend my money on, like, developing a business or something like that. So I still drive an old car. It's got 155,000 miles. I just went to Daytona and back, and now I'm going to head down to Daytona tomorrow and put another 500 miles on it. So it's an '06 Volkswagen Jetta diesel.
Nice.
And we get 40 miles a gallon with it. So it's like a really good commuter. I have a pickup that I basically just kind of keep sitting there. It's a newer truck, if I ever have to go somewhere or tow something, but I'm telling you, I love that Jetta. It's just a workhorse.
It's economical. It's smart right there.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned when you first got down there, you worked for a couple different teams. What were you like? What was your role? Like, what were you doing when you first got down there?
When I first moved to North Carolina, it was 2013, I believe. Spent a lot of time here that whole year, and I was working in the shop, learning the ropes. They had me starting from the bottom, basically. Like, I was cleaning the cars and doing mechanic work, but also racing on the weekends. So I enjoyed that year because that taught me a lot about behind the scenes. I think it's hard to be successful in anything especially if you're in a role like a decision making role or like the quarterback role. I consider driving as like a quarterback role because the team's behind you. You can't do it without them. Like they're pulling a lot of the weight. So it was great for me to kind of get that other perspective to see how it worked behind the scenes. And so that 2013 was like a huge foundation building year for me. And it's allowed me to really understand even up until now. Like if it wasn't for me working and hands on in the shop, like really dead, really dirty and greasy and like maintenance on the car, then I don't think I'd be in this position today.
Who were some of the teams you were working for at that time?
Well, that time in particular, I was racing in New England for myself with my own cars, but in North Carolina, I was working for the team that was owned by Brad Keselowski, and I can't remember if Brad had won the championship. I think he won the championship soon after, but it just goes to show like Brad's a pretty well-known driver now in the NASCAR series in the top level of the sport. And so I was driving for his team at the development series back at that point. So it all kind of everything developed pretty quick. It's cool to say, but it doesn't always happen for people. And I'm certainly could have been different just depending on circumstances changed. But I was around a lot of pretty smart people fairly quickly, especially when I first moved down.
So even once you get to like that highest level, there's still different tiers, right? So there's like the NASCAR series, and then aren't there like some like tiers below that as well?
Yeah. So like the way I like to explain it to people is the Cup Series is like major leagues, right? Like you can't go any higher than the NASCAR Cup Series. That's where the legends like Jeff Gordon, Dale Earnhardt, all of these people have raced. And then under there you have like the Xfinity series. I've raced in that series before. You have the NASCAR Truck Series, which is a series that I've done a lot of competition in. And then sort of identical to the Truck Series is the ARCA Series, which is where I won my championship in 2017 racing. So like those are the main four. When people are looking at stock car racing and say, hey, look, I want to try to make it to the top level in NASCAR in the United States, they're probably going to have to do some like ARCA racing, some Truck Series racing, and some Xfinity Series racing. And basically it all falls under the NASCAR umbrella. It's just like AAA. You know what I'm saying? Like it's the development series. It's where you get all your experience. You start winning races. People take notice. You're building up your following. You're building up the fans. You're building up like some sort of profile. And then I'll tell you, a very, very, very small percentage of people actually make it to the Cup Series, where, like I said, where Jeff Gordon won championships, where Dale Earnhardt won championships, where those guys where Danica Patrick, even she raced up there for many years and never won a race, but still like broke a lot of ground as far as females competing at the top levels of NASCAR.
So let's talk about the actual series itself. So the season kicks off, I'm guessing pretty soon, right? So the season runs from what month to what month?
The NASCAR seasons generally run, and I say NASCAR seasons because you're factoring in the three top, what I just mentioned before, and ARCA, if you call that a fourth, basically run from February up until October, November. So the season starts at Daytona. Last weekend they were on track. I was down there. I wasn't racing, but I was down there. And then this weekend we're going to be in Daytona. I'm going to be racing on Friday. There's racing happening on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Sunday is the Daytona 500. I'm not in the Daytona 500 this year. But like I said, Daytona starts the season, and it also ends in Florida as well at Homestead Speedway, which is right outside Miami. So it's a long season. It's 36 to 38 races if you're racing like the top level, the Cup Series level, and anywhere from 23 to 33 events if you're racing in the development series. They share a lot of the same weekends. Like sometimes the development series, the what I had mentioned just a couple minutes ago, are on the same track as the Cup Series, which is the top level. But sometimes they're not always on the same track.
So what are we going to see you racing in terms of which series are we going to see you racing in this year coming up here?
Well, I'm for sure going to be racing part time in the NASCAR Truck Series, and that's going to be the first event coming up at Daytona on Friday. That's going to be live on Fox Sports 1. A lot of the NASCAR races are either on just for anybody listening. Like if they say, I can never find it, most of them are on either Fox Sports 1, NBC Sports, or like Fox or NBC, the main channels. So it can be hard to find, but like it's usually on those 4 channels. They're televised. I don't know my for sure races that I'm going to do in the Truck Series yet, because I'm working with a different team owner this year. He's located in North Carolina as well, but that team's been involved in the NASCAR Truck Series for about 10 to 15 years, and so we're like I said, we're going to be doing Daytona, Martinsville, which is in Virginia, twice throughout the year. Going to be racing in Charlotte, right in my backyard, and racing in Bristol, Tennessee, and I hope we can add some races to that, just depending on on our performance. If we can get out of the gate pretty well at Daytona, I think we're going to add some races to that.
All right, going to get to another round of Ethan Asks Big Time Questions on Big Time, the podcast.
Out of all the places that you've raced, what is your favorite track? Could be from the amateur days, the pro days, any series or any circuit that you've ever raced in. What is your favorite place to race? I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's probably Spud Speedway. That's a pretty tough track to beat.
All right, which ones are going to be?
Spud Speedway ranks really high up there. I feel like if I were to pick it, then I'd be targeted for like bias or something, because that's where I'm from. So I'm gonna go ahead and pick 2 other tracks. One of them being like sort of a quote unquote amateur track, because it's and it's still in Maine. It's down in Oxford Plains Speedway. They have a huge race there every year that attracts people, basically amateur racers from around the country. It's got a really amazing purse. If you look at it, if you win the race, you can pocket some pretty amazing money. But it's just a cool track, a very competitive track, a small track, less than a half of a mile long. The other track that's nobody probably knows about, that's even listening to the podcast, is located in Illinois. It's a dirt track, and it's a mile long. It's they call it DuQuoin. It's at the Illinois State Fairgrounds. It's have you ever been to Bangor, like the horse track in Bangor?
Yeah.
Or like any sort of horse track? Well, it's just almost like an identical copy. It's a mile long, and you have stock cars on there racing in the ARCA series. When I won the championship back in 2017, the ARCA Racing Championship, that was a 20 race season, and 2 times throughout that year we raced on dirt, and those were really, really fun. I didn't have any sort of dirt background. A lot of race car drivers, like Tony Stewart, some of the people that your guests that are listening, or the people that are listening, might sort of think about, or when they think of NASCAR drivers, a lot of them did come from dirt racing, and I didn't have any background except those 2 races that I did in 2017, and those races I had a complete blast in.
Not what I would have suspected right there. That's definitely wasn't even on my radar. So learning new stuff all the time on Big Time. So let's stay on topic when it comes to the circuit here. So you mentioned that there's, it's quite a long season. You guys hit a lot of places. Obviously, the South is the hotbed when it comes to the stock car racing, but you guys go to Texas, California, all over the place. Is there one track in particular, or one race in particular that kind of means more to you than the others? Is there one that kind of stands out, or one that you kind of circle and look forward to?
Well, I think some of the most defining moments in my career were out in Las Vegas. Kind of give people a background. And the reason I say defining is for two reasons. In 2015, I was at Las Vegas Motor Speedway racing for the same gentleman I talked about, Brad Keselowski. I raced for him on and off from 2013 to 2015, or beginning of 2016. But I was out there and was involved in a pretty major crash, and I fractured my back in 2 places. So that took me out of commission for a little while. So fast forward to 2018, which was last year. Finally getting back to Las Vegas and getting, if you want to call it, getting back on the horse after being thrown off, and getting a top 10 finish at Las Vegas, which is I think a pretty important. It was more of maybe a psychological thing for myself, but also use it as like a lesson when I talk to people about like overcoming stuff. Whenever something happens in your life and you don't accomplish what you wanted to accomplish, or you get hurt, or you have an injury in sports, especially, I just think it's amazing that if you have the right mindset, you can get back to where you were. And it took me basically 3 years to get back to that same track in the same series. But believe it or not, I didn't really have anything. I didn't have any anxiety. I didn't have any fear. I just, got on the track that day and felt like, I was just excited to be back here and, to be overcome that sort of obstacles along the way, especially an injury like that can basically end your career. And working hard and sort of just keeping focused on the main goal, you can get back to where you were.
Yeah, so let's get back to this crash for a second here. Just curious, because sometimes you see people have a horrific injury, like on the basketball court, football field, and it's tough to watch. At any point, did you go back and watch the crash, or is it something you just didn't want to go back and have to kind of relive again? How do you overcome that?
Well, I don't have any flashbacks. I don't have that sort of experience with it. It's not something that haunts me really, but you can literally, find it on YouTube and look at it. Now I look back at it now and kind of think to myself, wow, that was I really would say that was probably top 25. NASCAR's been around for a long time, right? We all know that, but I'd say that's probably top 25, or if you want to be conservative, top 50 NASCAR crashes ever, as far as the impact, just the sheer impact of it. So, I mean, it goes to show how far along the safety's progressed. Like, I'll be honest, if it was 2001, when Dale Earnhardt died, he died in 2001 at Daytona, and my crash was actually multiple times more impact than his was, and he didn't make it. So just goes to show, like, when you kind of take that deep breath and think about it and sit down for a second and just, ooh, that was a fortunate night for me. And from the people that built that race car that safe, I've got to give a lot of people the credit behind the scenes. And I know, because I've been involved like in engineering studies with NASCAR, where after the fact, like, hey, we need you for a day. We want to do some crash impact studies, like computer simulated models on how you actually survived that and why did you get hurt? Because, like I said, I did get hurt. I had some spinal issues from it, but we want to study it because we want to make our future stuff better and safer for the drivers that come after you. So it's kind of cool to look back and figure that you've maybe made racing safer for the future.
Right. So you mentioned the Vegas track as having like some sort of special meaning to you because you went through there. Let me ask you this, because different parts of the country, different atmosphere, different vibes. Explain to me some of the different environments, or just the different vibe of like a racetrack in the South versus like a race weekend in out west or up here in New England. Like where's the best party at? What's the best weekend? Like if I wanted to go party for a NASCAR weekend, what part of the country is going to show me the best time?
Not from personal experience, right? I'll put that out there, but just from what I'm hearing, I feel like Talladega, which is a track in Alabama, has a reputation for throwing a pretty big party. Like if you're camping out, if you have some sort of a tent, or if you have a camper that you're renting, people say you need to go out there and experience the party that happens like the night before the big race. Everybody gets together, I think, has a big bonfire and just celebrates and has a good time. But even like Loudon, New Hampshire, growing up as a kid, they had a great time. The thing that is hard to describe, right? If somebody's never been to a NASCAR track, they would think that it's just the race. But I'll tell you what happens is people go for the experience. People go for the all around experience. Like, preferably you camp out, you tailgate, you're with people, you're with friends, you meet people, and it's just kind of like a really cool all around experience. And I really believe that's what separated itself when it became really popular back in like the 90s. NASCAR was filling these venues of over 100,000 people across the country. Whether you were in Texas or Loudon, New Hampshire, or Daytona, Charlotte Motor Speedway had at one time an attendance of, I think, definitely over 100,000, but I think like 115 or 120. And somebody told me, like, by the time you factor the people that were inside the track, in the grandstands, and just kind of like walking around, I think there was like 150,000 people. It's not as big as it used to be, because I think the thrill kind of does wear off after a while. We live in a world where you can stay home and watch a race now, like just like you can stay home and watch a game. You don't necessarily have to go out there and experience it. But I don't care where you are across the country. It's a pretty amazing experience. Like, I've talked to fans. I will say I've been to Canada for a race. There's a race up in Ontario. The Canadian fans are just as amazing as the fans in the United States. I actually think in some ways the fans up there are really passionate, because there's not a lot of NASCAR tracks. So
Right.
when there is an opportunity to go out there and be a part of an event, they're like, yeah, absolutely, I want to do it, and they have a good weekend too. So I would just would welcome anybody that's thinking that they're either a casual fan or not really a fan of NASCAR, to ask somebody, maybe ask a friend that is, to bring them to a track and just go out there, tailgate for a day, and just take in all the experiences that you can. And I think at the very least, if you're not going to come out of it a fan, like an avid fan, that you're at least going to have a different respect for it. Maybe kind of like a different perspective and a different respect than you would have ever imagined.
Right. Like 3 or 4 years ago, I was down in Charlotte. I was down there for a month for work, and it was right around the time of the Coca-Cola 600, I think is the name of the race they have there, right? At Charlotte Motor Speedway.
Mm-hmm.
And I went out there just to check out the track. I went there, it was like a week before the actual race. I went there like on a Monday just to check it out. And there was already like a ton of campers, like people just camped out, ready to go. And I couldn't get over the size of the track and stuff. Like, I walked in there and like it's massive. I was blown away by it. I couldn't believe it. But yeah, it's definitely seems like they know how to have fun.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that have happened. This was around before I came. Obviously, I'm pretty young, but when NASCAR started blowing up and gaining a lot of popularity back in the 90s, before then, a lot of the NASCAR tracks were smaller, like less than a mile long, and so you couldn't fit a lot of like campers. You couldn't fit a lot of people inside the racetrack. You can visualize that, right?
Yeah.
Because you've seen Charlotte.
Yeah.
But my point is, in the 90s, they started to build a lot of tracks that were bigger than a mile, like Charlotte, Texas, some of these other tracks that basically they can do everything inside the track. People can watch, the cars in the garage area, and basically where you're working on the cars are all there inside the track. The camping stuff is in there. A lot of like the sponsorship events are inside the track. So the commercial kind of took over. The commercial side of NASCAR grew a bunch, and so that's why there's a lot of bigger tracks on the circuit nowadays.
So I'm guessing that, first of all, it's hard to get on the scene. Like, it's hard to just get there. I'm guessing it's even harder that once you get there, it's tougher to even stay there. So you're there now. You've been there for a little while. I'm guessing you still got more that you want to do You wanna get higher and higher. What's the ultimate goal here? Like, do you have like the? I'm guessing it's to win to win at the highest level, right? Like, I'm guessing that's the goal at this point.
Yeah, that's a goal. For most drivers, that's basically the goal. They start out when they're 16 or 18, and they get opportunities in NASCAR. But like I said, and like you said, it's really hard just to stay there. People don't realize it. It's actually maybe easier to get there, but a lot harder to stay there. So, I'm fortunate to have been sort of involved and relevant for a while. I'm not the most popular guy. I'm not I'm not winning races every weekend, and I'm not competing at the top level. But just to sort of be considered and be like, hey, get calls from owners and people that own race teams and ask about meeting with them and ask about racing for them is still pretty humbling. And I think if you just have that mindset of as long as you can do what you love and can compete and are going to be competitive, that's my main goal. Yeah, it would be nice to look back 20 years and say you made it all the way and you won a championship and you won 5,000 races, or I'm exaggerating, but very few people can do that. So I think if you can just kind of not burn any bridges, stay relevant, stay involved, and leave some sort of small legacy behind. That's the goal that I want to look back, many years and say, that's what I did.
All right, gonna get to another question from Ethan. Ethan asks big time questions.
So, having had the opportunity to race in some NASCAR events, and I'm sure you've had some chances to meet quite a few drivers that you've probably grew up idolizing and looking up to. Has there been any one person that you've met where you've been just completely blown away, starstruck, speechless kind of deal? Who's the person that's put you in that position where you were just like, holy shit, I'm actually talking to this guy right now?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm gonna answer it, but I'm gonna go off in like a different tangent because social media is a pretty amazing tool, and everybody kind of thinks about the negatives that come up with social media, but I really enjoy it because it connects people, and it whether you're in Texas or Maine or California, you can basically communicate with people. You can communicate with your idols. You can talk to people that you looked up to for years. And earlier, I talked about my favorite driver being Mark Martin, but it was a really cool experience because I've still never met him in person. Can you believe it? But because he was retired by the time I was really involved in NASCAR, he had retired from racing and whatnot. But he's actually pretty involved on like Instagram and Twitter, and so like he'll respond to my tweets and like congratulate me, and he even posted like twice, I think, in different years, basically saying that he thought I was like one of the best prospects, for the future. So how do you've never met this person. He was your favorite driver. It's almost like meeting them in person, right? Like you're in awe that he's even noticing you.
That is crazy right there. Real quick, you mentioned social media. Let's just throw it in there. Where can these fans of ours find you on social media, Twitter and Instagram? I'm guessing you're on there. Where can they? How can they follow you?
People can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Snapchat, I have an account, but I don't really use it. I feel like I'm like one of the 1% of people my age that don't use Snapchat. But I feel like it's hard enough to keep Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook updated. They can follow me basically at Austin Theriault. AustinTerrioRacing.com, or not well is my website, but Austin Theriault Racing on Facebook, and then Instagram would be at Austin Theriault as well. I try to keep it the same because people have like unique names, but it can be hard to remember sometimes.
Right. So you mentioned Instagram, and you're on there. I just happened to be on Instagram a couple nights ago, and you were Instagramming live. You just got done a workout, which raises a good question here. All right. Are race car drivers athletes? Because obviously you're trying to stay in shape. I'm guessing it plays a role when it comes to auto racing. So let's settle this debate right here. Are race car drivers athletes?
Well, I'm glad you brought that question up because I wanted to bring up some controversy tonight, get some conversation started. Right.
All right.
I'm willing to play devil's advocate. and say that, let's just say a race car driver is not an athlete, but let me kind of put some bullet points down there from my experience and then like what I've seen in the past. So race car drivers nowadays usually are pretty much in shape, pretty fit. They have to have a good workout regimen because of a couple reasons. People don't realize it. Inside the race car, it can get as hot as like 140 degrees. Air condition is not like you'd find in any sort of like automobile that you drive on the road. You do have some air blowing into your helmet, but most times when the ambient temperature is 80, 90, 100 outside, if you're racing in the summer, inside the race car is going to be 30 to 40 degrees hotter because the engine, the exhaust, and everything like that. So I've lost 5 pounds, 5, 6, 7 pounds in a race. Longer races, some of the guys like that compete in 500-mile races, they may lose up around 10 pounds. So you're strapped in. Yeah, you're not like moving a ton. You're strapped in. Your neck is basically located. Your head's located with a helmet. You can't move around too much, but the muscles that you use, like, basically put it this way, like I've gotten out of a race car before and I feel like I'm in decent shape and had to get fluids and had to like go into the care center and like get water and just recuperate from that. So I'm not an expert when it comes to like the body dynamics, like what sort of muscles are being used. I know there's a lot of like ab muscles, obviously your arms, your neck's pretty important because you're cornering at really, really high extreme forces and stuff like that. So I think we need to get another podcast. We need to do another podcast and get like an expert. There's actually somebody that I know. I don't know her first name, but I think I have her business card. She's in I think she's in Southern Maine, like at USM, University of Southern Maine. Like, and she did a whole study on the dynamics or the biological side of what a race car driver goes through. And like, she put a heart rate monitor, she put like other monitors on the body. And I think like the average heart rate was like 140 throughout the whole race.
Damn.
And the only time that it came down was under a caution flag, which is where everybody slows down under like a controlled speed, comes down pit road. But the minute the green flag drops, all of a sudden you have this, adrenaline comes back. Your total focus, like there's nothing else that you're focused on except what's in front of you and the job you have to complete. And once again, your heart rate goes up to 130, 140. And in extreme temperatures, like it's sometimes all you can just to complete a race.
Yeah, I mean, just to sustain that heart rate, I mean, that takes conditioning. You got to be fit in order to just to sustain that heart rate. So I'm gonna go out on a limb and say yes, you guys are athletes, and I'll also make another argument. You're constantly just reading and reacting to the cars around you, just like a quarterback in football. You got to read and react. I mean, that's what you guys do all day long.
Yeah, it's not a Sunday drive.
Right, absolutely. There you go. Argument settled. They are athletes. So I check the Bangor Daily on a daily basis. It's one of the first things I do in the morning. You just check what's going on up there. Bangor Daily News did mention your name in a headline talking about the race this weekend. So we talked about the season's here. It's starting this weekend. What's the realistic goal for this season coming up here? Like, where do you want to be at year's end?
I want to help this team that I'm working with get even better than they have in the past. They've been around for a while. The gentleman that owns the team is a great guy, and he loves racing. His company that he owns actually sponsors the team, so that's kind of a win-win for both of us. It's a win for him because he can promote his own company, but at the end of the day, like I said, I want to compete. I want to sort of elevate the performance as much as I can. These guys work hard, and they've built like a really, really, really good team. But I think with my experience level and the dedication I can bring, compared to maybe years past, I think we can look back at the end of 2019, and if we did more than the amount of races that we planned on from this day that I'm telling you now, then that probably means that we competed, that we finished well, and that we were able to add races to the schedule. And then when 2019 finishes, maybe we can look into 2020 and expand the schedule from there.
We got a segment called "When You Die, What Jersey Do You Want to Be Buried In?" So normally it's like I said, it's our first race car episode here. So maybe not jersey do you want to be buried in whenever it's time to go to the grave, or maybe what sponsorship, or maybe what race team do you want to like be in the grave with you when it's all said and done at the end of the day? Like which one means the most to you so far?
Well, I like talking about my inspiration as far as a previous driver that came way before me that raced in the top levels of NASCAR. His name was Mark Martin. He was he was really respected in the sport, and I kind of want to leave that legacy behind where people remember the good times. People remember that you were like a really good person and that you were, fair on the racetrack and stuff. And yeah, you're going to have to push the limits from time to time, but I want to be, I guess kind of going back to your main question, if I was having to be buried, I want to have, his name on the back of it.
Nice. That's a good answer. Mark Martin, number 6. Am I right? Back in the day?
Yep. Number 6.
White car?
Well, he drove a Valvoline oil car.
That's what it was.
The latter part of his career, it makes me blush a little bit. The latter part of his career, he drove the Viagra car.
Oh,
so.
Shit. Hey, money's money, right? Sponsorship is sponsorship.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember back in the day, we used to have a camper out at it was Clover Hill. I forget what it's called now. Whatever the camp.
Loon's Echo?
Loon's Echo, yeah.
Oh, I remember that. Geez, they used to bet on NASCAR races a lot.
Yeah. And so I remember Mark Martin and Ernie Irvin was my guy. I had no idea about racing at all, but I liked his car. I think it was black, number 28, I think, something like that. So back in the day.
Yeah, Jeff Gordon was popular over there too.
Yeah, Jeff Gordon was super popular. But I remember on race days or Sunday, right? And people put money on it, and someone would always have it on, and there'd always be a big crowd there. Mm-hmm. Good times. So like I said, I'm going to go back and edit this afterwards and put stuff where it's supposed to be. So we're going to do the outro now, and then I got a couple more things to ask you afterwards, and I'll chop it up afterwards. So, so that's going to do it for this week's episode. Austin Theriault, 4 Kent native, definitely making the Valley proud. Austin, is there anything you want to say before we get up out of here? Is there anything we didn't touch on that you want to talk about real quick, or any announcements you want to make? We'd love to break big news on Big Time. If you have anything, now's your chance.
Well, no, like I said, I appreciate it. It's exciting. I joke around with some friends of mine in the racing industry. I feel like podcasts are kind of, I don't know if I want to use the word re-emerging, but I think it's a really cool idea, and it's something that I want to even get involved in. I don't know if it's going to be this year. I don't know if it's going to be 5 years from now. But I'm really excited about the podcasts, and I don't think we're going to be competitors. I just think the more, like, really realistically, the more podcasts that are out there, the more people are interested in like discovering this whole industry of like long form audio, right? Yeah. The 2-minute interview is not the same thing as like sitting down and talking to somebody for 30 minutes or an hour, kind of going through their whole story and their whole life. And people find that stuff interesting. Absolutely.
That's what I like. It's a form of storytelling, and you said it's more than just a 2-minute quick interview. You get to go back and touch on everything. So it's a great idea. Also, one last question for you before we get up out of here. We talked about sponsorships, and now it's a big deal in the racing industry. Obviously, how can Big Time get a sticker on the car? How can we get a decal on there? What do we got to do to get some sponsor the team here? I don't know if we can afford it, but.
Here's what we need to do. We need to I don't know if you want to put this on the podcast, but we need to sit down and figure out how we can incorporate the podcast into what I'm trying to do in the future. Yeah. Maybe there's some collaboration there.
I like that. I'm all about collaboration, so we'll sit down and figure something out. But let's just plan on this. If you ever come back and race at Spud Speedway again, Big Time, the podcast, the logo will be on the hood of that car.
Okay, well, absolutely. Let's pencil that in.
Let's make that happen. All right, hey, ladies and gentlemen, our first professional athlete on the Big Time podcast, Austin Theriault. Like I said, thank you for coming on and doing this. We've been trying to make this happen for a little while here. I think the timing's perfect with the racing season getting kicked off this weekend. So thanks again. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure to go back and check out all of our previous episodes on YouTube, on iTunes, and now on Spotify. So make sure you're checking those out. But until next week's episode, we're out.